So I want to add clump variation based on the map that we previously painted. And I usually feed this map into the stray rate of the system and into the clump size itself. So here we are going to compare how that looks with and without the clump map applied to it. Then we can use the inverted map for the stray rate while we use the and clamp the values to a value that looks better in the viewport. And here we are going to clamp the values for the inverted map. See how that looks like with different values. This is a crisper version, for example. It depends how your reference looks like. Sometimes you want like a very defined clump look. Sometimes you want a more blurred look to the clumps. So you have to check it with reference and see what type you will need. We can see that the clumps are getting lost in the hair process at some point. So I will try to see what is causing this and disable the length attribute to see if that makes any difference here. I want to have a look into the tag room again, and as a next step, I want to transfer it to a different pose. So we will just see which node works better in this case. Sometimes it depends on the pose itself. It depends on the surface tension. Sometimes the guide deform works better than the guide transfer. So it's always worth to check and see which one works better before you place the final nodes. So here we will bring in the skin updates that we worked on and the normal skin that we have in our working scene. And here you can see the first result with the guide deform and the other one with the guide transfer too. And here on the guide transform, you can see that at the roots of the tail, it looks very lifted and not necessarily how we want the tail to look like. You're also getting a weird clump pattern on the roots themselves, while on the guide transfer, it looks like very smooth in general. So we want to go for the guide transfer in this case. So here I created, basically I cached out all the different first sets that I have and as Alembic caches, and I will combine them to a whole render groom SOP where I just have geometries similar to what we did with the normal meshes that we're rendering. That way the evaluation will be faster and you will waste less evaluation time by rendering and less memory. Here, because of our mesh update, we have to switch it over to a Alembic node. So this will take some time to evaluate, so I will just speed things up and then do a quick test render to see how our groom looks like at the very moment. And it looks like something is going wrong with the tail still. So yeah, it's sometimes useful to render your character from different camera angles. And you have the snap function on the bottom where you can save snapshots of each rendering that you did. It's similar to Arnold if you work with Arnold or the APR in RenderMan. To see if the changes are worth it or not. Usually what I do is I render that from different camera angles and see what my tail and the back still that we will focus on next. And you have the cache manager under Windows Cache Manager. Sometimes when you cache often, you will see that your physical memory is running full. So you have to clear that once in a while in order to make more space. So Houdini works that way that it caches and you don't necessarily need that all the time when you do changes or work on a different SOP. The weird issues that we were seeing earlier, and it looks like the skin primitives changed and basically the information that is baked from the skin onto the fur itself that changed because our skin most likely changed. So the guide groom won't be compatible with the groom blend anymore. So what you can do, if you still want to blend it, you can use a hair clump that usually works 100%. And if you use the clumps themselves, you can project them afterwards, UV transfer, for example. But yeah, here give them when it comes to the evaluation. We can see that the tail is looking weird as well. That is also because our mesh is not being read into as an Alembic node, but as a OBJ node. So the importers are getting confused and we are not being able to propagate the attributes over correctly. So, and here we have a look how the hair system looks like. And now we will try to find out why the tail node, at least the tail attribute is not being read correctly here. You can see the tail is not included. When it comes to debugging those things, color nodes are most helpful, and usually when I debug things, I will just skip through the whole hierarchy and see which node is causing me issues and check like each point of the hierarchy until I figure out where it breaks and why it breaks. Sometimes if you work with proprietary tools, it's worth to dive into the node structure and see why it fails or what the error is. But yeah, here, this is all still very simple. So we will just read the skin into once more and check if everything comes through correctly now. And it looks like it comes through correctly. What I see here is that some fur is make sure to do this operation just on the guides and not on the full hair, unless you want very long loading times. So this is a very heavy node. It takes a long time to evaluate. And yeah, usually if you move the guides, you will be able to move the whole hair by itself anyway. So this is how it looks like with the guide VDB activated and our guides pushed out of the body. So in order to see what's happening to my groom, I will drop an ambient light in order to see the details better in the fur itself. And then I will copy over the ear at system. And we will go for the same structure that we had for the ears and cheeks, where we transfer basically an active area, and just for the legs themselves as well. So we will create that here. Just make sure that we're just reading in the body cache and leg cache and not anything else that we don't need. Otherwise it will be very slow. In order to speed things up, you can also drop a delete node and delete that by range and delete 300 guides out of 500. So you get a representation of your groom, but not the full amount of guides. If you work with hair systems, you have prune options. So we're basically rebuilding like a prune system here. So here we can delete the guides that were previously in the guide groom, and then basically similar to what we did with all the other parts, we will just place some guides in the areas where we think we need more or additional fur systems or a different shape in general. So I want this to be more voluminous and shape-wise poofier, less clumps in general, so like a more interpolated look. But I will control these over the hair system later on, then just interpolate that with what we had previously here. I'm also planning to create another one for the chest area where it has like more clumped strands. And yeah, I think that will be about it. Maybe for some transitions as well. Maybe the tail could do like with some extra work, or the back, for example. But yeah, here we will create our active area, see if we can improve the region. It's very difficult to work on this cat because you have on the one hand very soft hair, and on the other hair you can almost see like it almost looks like paint strokes. So you have very flat clumps that are very thin, stretched on one side. So it's very difficult to recreate that in a CG environments because the clump options are somewhat limited. That's why we have to look into other ways to achieve stuff like what we did with the memory lines, for example. Here I just want a bit of fading of this hair system and our default hair system. So I usually add a length node and set it to the active area attribute. Or in this case, I just used it to make it longer in general. Here I will just add a guide mask and put it to a curve mask so our clump looks a little bit more opened up on the root position. It still looks too clumped. It needs to look more loosened up in general. So I will try to see how I can achieve that look. And as you can see, if you set this to the active area, it almost looks wrong here. So either the transferred attribute is too blurred or too tiny in general. So we'll try to see, because this is the attribute that will be also picked up when you're blending it over by using a clump in. Doesn't seem to make any difference, at least not much of a difference. And then I will add a little bit of curl variation as well, just to break off the parallel lines there. Just trying to find the right value here. Blend it with the other stream of the main fur. In that case, the main stream of the body fur. So we will have to adjust the leg groom and the body groom, and for that we will copy parts over from the face groom. I think the cheek section here will be one of the better ones to copy over. So we will just paste that whole thing and connect that right at the end of the stream. Keep in mind you have to do that both for the legs and for the body, and you have to delete the active area attribute before that if you have that in any other stream. Just switch over the object merges to the parts that we just created. And you can manually switch it over here in the blast, where you can define the area. I will settle on 0.2. I have to clean up these graphs. There's a lot of stuff that is for the cheeks specifically that I don't need there. Also, it's complaining that the guides don't have the skin attribute, so I will quickly drop a guide skin attribute lookup here and connect it to the guide input. And that should evaluate fine. Just make double sure that our normal guides are connected to the skin as well. And then you should be able to see something incoming here on the hair clump. And I don't see much change here. Of the legs. So this is the body groom here. So that's something that is still on my plate for this character to do. I will just make sure this is roughly working and is roughly what I'm expecting it to look like. And you can see there's, like, if you compare it to previously and with it included, you can see that the shapes are more successful. You can see the shape change more if you put a value above 1 into the extent, but yeah, necessarily try to avoid that. What I also like to do when the groom is like 70 or 80% ready, or even before that, I like to render out a sequence. For that, I will key the lights and the character itself, so it turns itself and then it turns the light in a lighting setup to see the character from all angles and then in different lighting situations. So we will key the first 30 frames of the character for a 360 degree and then the light as well in the next 30 frames. And in order to render a sequence, you can go into the out node. There's a mantra render node, and yeah, you can set it up like any other rendering object. It's mostly the representation of your render view. So make sure your render view renders correctly. And if you want to render the sequence, you can specify the solution. You can even go lower on the quality that will make your render faster. And then it will give you out like this EXR sequence or PNG or whatever you set it to. I have this fancy tool here. It's DJV that I like to use. It's basically allowing you to show a sequence of your rendered EXR pictures if you double click it. You even have options to change the speed or even image control, so you can adjust the exposure levels or clip off, which is very nice. So this is a good tool to just check your sequence if you haven't installed Nuke or any other program where you can read EXRs as they are. So keep in mind, this is just like a checkup on how your groom looks like at the moment. It's not the final groom, and you mostly want to do compositing on it later on. This is just for like a preview, a quick preview, quick and dirty. And this is how our groom looks like now. There are a couple of issues that I still want to address.